Right, let's now shift our focus to China. A notorious serial killer has been executed. Her name was Lao Rongzhi. Let me put a face on it. This is what she looked like.
Welcome back, guys. I trust you've been staying safe. I hope the holidays are going well and you are preparing adequately for the new year. Today's true crime story is taking us to China, where as of a few days ago, a woman by name Lao Rongzhi has been executed based on the charges of her conspiring with her boyfriend to commit 7 fatalities against various victims and also their engagement in various high-profile robberies and abductions. This true crime story goes to show how some criminals start from very humble beginnings and then escalate to become the beasts and monsters they are at the point of their arrest and sentencing. You would find that sometimes monsters are not born, they are made. Now, in the case at hand, Lao Rongzhi is a woman who fell in love with another man. Now, at this point, she was just a primary school teacher in the 90s in China. And she fell in love with this guy whom she was really romantically intimate with. So, at the point, she felt like there was more to life for her than the life that she was having as a school teacher. Now, the name of this boyfriend of hers was Fa Ziyan. Permit me if I don't pronounce the names rightly. I'm not so familiar with these names. But let's just call the boyfriend Fa. And let's call the girl here or the lady here Lao Rongzhi. Let's just shorten her name to Lao. So it's a love affair between Lao and Fa or Fa Zi. So Lao was a primary school teacher. She was dealing with kids, teaching them the virtues of life, teaching them academics, helping them to become better members of society. And I always say that teaching is a very honorable job. Although in some jurisdictions, they are not giving the respect and attention that they need. But I believe that teachers are one of the key professions who actually mold the future of every country and mold generations in that effect. So this was the humble beginning that Lao had. She was a primary school teacher. She was dealing with children. Now she fell in love with Fa and things began to go south. Fa was a guy who was drawn to the fast life, to the quick cash scheme. And at a point in time, Lao was also fascinated by the returns that type of life was bringing as compared to her teaching lifestyle, which was, to her mind, basically boring and not paying as well, because most jurisdictions don't actually have the best salaries for their teachers. And some people, like Lao, also felt that the job wasn't exciting because she wasn't getting that thrill that rolling with Fa Zi, her boyfriend, brought her. So at a point in time, Fa Zi started to have an influence on Lao, because it turns out that Fa Zi was not earning his incomes legally. He was into some shady stuff. His hands were in a lot of bad pies, and at a point in time, Lao was getting drawn in by the seemingly fast life and bad boy appeal that Fa Zi had. And it didn't take long for Lao to be drawn in fully. So, at this point in time, they formed a duo. It was like China's own version of Bonnie and Clyde, where now Lao Rongzhi and her boyfriend Fa Ziyan were teaming up to commit robberies and kidnappings. So this was their modus operandi. Lao Rongzhi, being a beautiful woman at the time in the 90s, would be the one to attract the victims. The victims were mostly males, so she would be more like a honey trap. And once she traps you in, the boyfriend, Fa Ziyan, will show up and then dish out the punishment, or dish out the brutalities and commit the robbery. So basically, they were doing more of honey traps, and Lao Rongzhi was using her beauty as the trap. All in all, they had a lot of victims and they cashed out. In total, it is recorded that they cashed out about 100,000 yuan. That's the equivalent of about $14,000. Now, someone would say that this is not really much money, because $14,000 in 2023, although it's quite an amount, it's also not so significant. But this bears to note that these crimes were committed in the 90s. They were committed in the 90s. That's over 2 decades ago. So that was huge money back then. Now, they went on to perform these crimes for a long time, to a point that they were escalating, and they started resorting to taking people's lives, such that it's reported that at a point in time, one of their targets was lured in by Lao Rongzhi, and when her boyfriend, Fa Ziyan, came in to rob this guy, it ended up in him assaulting this guy to the point that the guy lost his life. And they robbed him and didn't end there. They also took a key from him, went to his house, was able to access his house with the key, and it turns out that his wife and child were there. And in the course of the robbery, just so there wouldn't be any witnesses, Lao Rongzhi and Fa Ziyan thought it wise that the best way to go was to also unalive these 2 people as well, just to save themselves. So it brought to a total of 7 fatalities at the hands of Lao Rongzhi and her her boyfriend Fa Ziyan, over the period that they were committing these crimes together. That is very sad, because for someone who has been working with children and teaching children, you would expect that this person will have some form of empathy in her. More so, her being a woman, it's expected she should have more sympathy in her towards life of other people than her crazy boyfriend, who was just drawn to the fast and easy life. But it seems that Lao Rongzhi was fully in bed with her boyfriend, Fa Ziyan. So there was no remorse on their part for any of their victims, and they went about dishing their bitter pills of robbery, abductions, and sometimes even fatalities without any mercy shown to their victims. Now, in the early 90s, they were very wanted. The police was all about trying to find them and then deal with them. And finally, they were very lucky to get the kingpin of the 2, in the person of the boyfriend, Fa Ziyan. The police arrested him in 1999 when he was trying to claim a ransom on someone they had abducted. And in that same year, he was executed by the law. So it was expecting that, oh, then if he, the mastermind, has been arrested, then it won't take long before his girlfriend, Lao Rongzhi, will be picked up as well by law enforcement. Little did they know that Lao Rongzhi, under the tutelage of her boyfriend, had just become a very smart person, because immediately her boyfriend was picked up, Lao Rongzhi thought it wise to also flee from that province. So she fled, and since then she has been on the move, changing aliases and evading capture and law enforcement detection for a total of 2 decades. Yeah, you heard me right. She has been escaping and avoiding capture from the police for a total of 20 years. That's Lao Rongzhi, and she became more like a myth and a mysterious figure in the annals of China's criminal history, because people grew up to know the name, but it was that itch that the police couldn't scratch, because they had that blemish on their record for 20 years that they haven't been able to apprehend her. And the police were treating this case very seriously. And I respect how police forces of these days treat their cold cases with so much tenacity. They don't give up on their cold cases. You might think they have, but they haven't given up on those cases. And sometimes they are chasing scientific breakthroughs that can help them break through cold cases and solve them. And that tenacity is very admirable. They should keep it up, because it helps to keep the general public safe and also reinforce the confidence that people like us have in them. And that was exactly what the Chinese police were doing. They were unrelenting. And Lao Rongzhi on the run was also unrelenting. She had several aliases to switch to. So she was always switching from one alias to the other, and she got by for a total of 20 years. Now, fast forward. Lao Rongzhi had actually settled and was trying to balance herself into life using one of these aliases. For 2 decades, she had been running using these aliases, and she felt that she had done enough to now settle in for a normal life, and as such, she went to a province called Xiamen in the Fujian province in November of 2029 and settled there. Eventually, she got a job in a shopping mall in this province where she was selling watches. Imagine you are a customer and you are buying from this shop. Little do you know that you are actually buying and being served by Lao Rongzhi, the wanted serial killer of over 2 decades. The itch the Chinese police couldn't scratch for 2 decades. The woman who is like a myth in the annals of Chinese criminal history. She had blended in so well, but little did she know that the police were also blending in well enough to detect these aliases that she was switching to and switching from. And at this point, unfortunately for her, she was arrested in November of 2019, and finally the police had their person. 2 years after this, she was sentenced to death by the intermediate court for the 3 charges that were leveled against her and her boyfriend at the time of his arrest. These charges included the fatalities of 7 people, the robberies, and then the abductions. So it looks like light was not at the end of the tunnel for Lao Rongzhi. Now, the convictions and the death penalty ended up being upheld by the People's High Court in November of 2022. Let me explain. In China, a death sentence made by lower courts has to be submitted to the Supreme People's Court for review. From this point, the sentence can only be carried out if it is approved by the top court. Now, during this, to fully protect Lao's legal rights, the top court actually interrogated Lao during the review period, and her lawyer was also given permission to access all the case materials and meet Lao Rongzhi and submit his defense opinions. So I think that this was their way of giving her a fair trial. Now, according to the courts, Lao Rongzhi was charged with working with her boyfriend, Fa Ziyan, to commit the robberies, the kidnappings, and the fatalities in the provinces of Jiangxi, Zhejiang, Jiangsu, and Anhui from 1996 to 1999 in a space of just 3 years. These couple were terrorizing the residents of these provinces. So, the court also concluded that Lao was responsible for picking targets at entertainment venues, while her boyfriend, Fa Ziyan, violently attacked them. So, These were the charges that were leveled against Lao Rongzhi and were the basis upon which the death penalty was being suggested. And then Lao Rongzhi had the chance to put her defense forward. And this was what herself and her defense attorney were trying to sell to the courts. I didn't buy it, but this was what they said. Now, according to them, Lao Rongzhi only partook in the robberies and the abductions, but that she took no part in the fatalities of these victims that were recorded in their name. Total of 7 victims, that is, with one of them being a kid. According to Lao Rongzhi's attorney, Lao Rongzhi only took part in the robberies and the abductions. Even with that, she was forced by her ex-boyfriend to partake in it, and that he threatened that if she didn't, he would physically assault and harm her. I still don't buy it because, well, like they say, dead men tell no tales. This guy has been executed in 1999. If you were really innocent, you would have found a way to show up. You wouldn't have been on the run for 20 years, running from the law, and being smart enough to switch between aliases. You made yourself look so guilty, and you partook in the whole thing between 1996 to 1998. It's called conspiracy, and in law, in some jurisdictions, when it comes to conspiracy, depending on the extent of your contribution to that conspiracy, you are equally as guilty as the person who performed the final serious act resulting from that conspiracy. So she couldn't be successful in court with those pleas, and rightly so. Unfortunately for Lao Rongzhi, she wasn't successful, and the charges that had been leveled against her, they stuck. So as of a few days ago, female serial killer Lao Rongzhi was executed after China's top court approved her death sentence. Her execution was carried out by the Nanshan Intermediate People's Court in Jiangxi province, where Lao was convicted of intentional homicide, robbery, kidnapping, and as such, also given the death penalty. For me, there are some lessons in here. The first of them being, be very careful who you allow to influence you. There are some things are fascinating. There are certain things you would see some people do, and it comes with a sort of edge. It comes with a sort of feeling, some adrenaline rush, where you'd feel, yeah, it makes you come alive. But the consequence can actually make you become unalived, because some of these things are just very destructive habits that are waiting to lead you down the bad road. And for someone like Lao Rongzhi, working with kids as a teacher, teaching primary school kids, that was one of the most honorable jobs you could do. But unfortunately for her, she got swayed to the fast life and cutting of corners to make money, and got him to bed, literally and illiterally, with Faziyin. And unfortunately for her, she had to spend the next 20 years of her life running away from the law, looking over her shoulders, and eventually got picked up and now has also been executed. Be careful who you get into bed with. Be careful who you allow to influence you, because sometimes by virtue of what you get yourself into, you are equally as culpable as the person who performs the final deadly acts. It's called conspiracy. Enjoy the holidays, but then please enjoy it safely. We are looking forward to 2024 and bringing you awesome true crime content. But subscribe if you are yet to do so. We are very grateful for your support in 2023, and we are looking to do more for you in 2024. Stay safe out there. I'll catch you on the next one.